What actually comes to mind when you hear the word war? Most people jump straight to the obvious stuff: death, destruction, mass hunger, or the total loss of freedom. But I want you to really think about this. What if war isn't about any of that anymore? What if it's no longer about who's right or wrong, or even about winning or losing? What if the next great conflict we face is simply the final, total collapse of civilization itself? Picture this: the internet just stops. The entire global network goes dark. Financial systems evaporate, meaning your bank account, your credit, and all that digital wealth just vanish into thin air. There's no money left to trade with. Millions of people are lying in the streets, and the truth is, there's no one left who has the strength or the order to bury them, and every bit of vegetation becomes poisonous. You'd have a world where toxins and whatever oxygen is left are in a constant, losing battle. Massive wildfires would rage unchecked, tsunamis would hammer every coast on the map, and the earth would be shaking with earthquakes almost every hour. The sky, it would turn completely pitch black, and we wouldn't see the sun for decades. This isn't some crazy basement-level conspiracy theory or a script for a blockbuster apocalypse movie. This is the exact scenario predicted by Albert Einstein just 2 years after the Second World War came to an end. He was convinced that a Third World War would inevitably drag humanity, kicking and screaming, all the way back to the Stone Age. And the terrifying part? Looking at where we are today, we might already be halfway there. To understand why Einstein was so sure about this, we have to look at the context of his life in 1947. You can't separate this prediction from the trauma of WE2. Nuclear energy, the most dangerous threat to human survival we've ever known, was, in a twisted irony, a fruit of Einstein's own genius. It all started with his theory of relativity. That theory provided the math and the principles that made the atomic bomb mechanically possible. Then there was the Manhattan Project, which was really sparked by a letter Einstein sent to President Roosevelt. Once Roosevelt got that letter, he fast-tracked the Uranium Advisory Committee. That led to the Manhattan Project, led by Oppenheimer, which resulted in the bombs that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, it's important to clarify, Einstein wasn't physically there building these weapons, but he knew his theories were the blueprint. He spent the rest of his life haunted by that knowledge. He felt a deep, crushing regret, knowing that the most terrifying weapon ever created was rooted in his own mind. In a 1947 interview with Newsweek, he flat out admitted, "If I had known that the Germans would fail to develop an atomic bomb, I would not have done anything." His regret was so public and so deep that in July 1946, Time magazine featured him on their cover with his famous equation EEMC squared, set against a background of a nuclear blast. He was, more than anyone else, acutely aware of the existential threat nuclear weapons posed to our existence. So 2 years after the war, in March 1947, a report in Liberal Judaism recounted a private dinner party where Einstein was asked by Alfred Werner what kind of weapons would define the next big war. Einstein was quiet for a moment, remembering his past. When he finally answered, he shook his head and said that while he didn't know what weapons would be used in the Third World War, he had no doubt about the Fourth. They would be fought with spears and stones. He said this because he was convinced that if a third war happened, it would involve nuclear weapons, and by the time the dust settled, everything we've built would be so shattered that humanity would be forced back into a primitive, prehistoric struggle for survival. For those of us who grew up in the relative safety of the modern era, war feels like something from a dusty history book. But Einstein was a living witness to 2 world wars. He was even involved in the high-level decision-making circles. He knew exactly how fast technological progress can turn into a weapon of mass death. That's why his warning about the Stone Age wasn't just a random guess. He saw it as a mathematical certainty if we kept playing this game. History is filled with moments where we've been centimeters away from that third war. Let's walk through some of those terrifying near misses. The first was the Korean War, 1950-1953. This was the first major flashpoint of the Cold War. You had the Soviet Union backing the North with communist ideology and the US backing the South with capitalism. They almost went head-to-head in a way that could have started a global chain reaction, but they managed to keep it within the peninsula. Then there was the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. This was the big one, 13 days where the world held its breath. The Soviets were moving nuclear torpedoes into Cuba, and the US Navy was intercepting their submarines with depth charges. A Soviet captain named Valentin Savitsky was ready to launch a nuclear torpedo, but he needed a unanimous yes from his three commanders. The third man, Vasili Arkhipov, refused to give the order. He stood his ground, citing broken cooling systems and low battery levels. He quite literally saved the world that day. Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., an advisor to President Kennedy, later called this the most dangerous moment in human history. Then, the 1971 India-Pakistan War. 11 Indian air bases were hit by Pakistan, and the conflict spiraled for 13 days. Both sides were being backed by superpowers, India by the Soviets and Pakistan by the US. It got so bad that Nixon sent the 7th Fleet to the Bay of Bengal, and the British sent an aircraft carrier too. The Soviets countered by sending their own destroyers. They were locked in a standoff, just waiting for the trigger. Fortunately, Nixon used the hotline, that special communication link set up after the Cuban crisis, to get in touch with Leonid Brezhnev and urge him to pull India back. Remember the 1973 Yom Kippur War? American and Soviet fleets were facing each other in the Mediterranean, just a few hundred miles apart. America raised its DEFCON level from 4 to 3. Both fleet commanders had their attack strategies ready to go. Soviet Admiral Volobuyev even had a plan to target US aircraft carriers before they could launch their jets. It only cooled down when Egypt accepted a diplomatic proposal, and a UN resolution brought it to a halt. Think about the 1999 Pristina airport incident in Kosovo. Russian troops occupied the airport before NATO could get there. General Wesley Clark ordered a siege, but British General Mike Jackson refused to engage, realizing it would spark a direct fight with Russia that could go global. Even the drone strike on General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 sent the world into a panic, with people trending World War III on every platform. And now we're looking at the invasion of Ukraine. With Putin's nuclear rhetoric and threats about using the RS-28 Sarmat missile, a weapon that can carry nuclear warheads 18,000 km, the fear has returned to the main stage. Russia has the Tsar Bomba, which is nearly 4,000 times as powerful as the Hiroshima bomb. It could flatten London in an instant. Right now, 11 countries hold about 12,500 nuclear warheads. Russia and the US own 89% of them. When you add in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the rising tension between China and Taiwan, and North Korea's constant testing, we're back in a place where one diplomatic failure could trigger a total collapse. If the Third World War breaks out, it's not just about who occupies which city, it's about the erosion of trust. When nations stop talking, trade stops, economies collapse, and infrastructure becomes a target for cyber terrorists. Famine would follow, and if those nukes fly, we're talking about an environmental disaster that wipes out the atmosphere. Scientist Paul Crutzen explained it best back in 1982. A nuclear war would throw massive amounts of radioactive soot into the sky, blocking out the sun. We'd be talking about decades of nuclear winter where nothing grows. The ozone layer is ripped apart, and the radioactive black rain turns the ground into a graveyard. Einstein was right. If we cross that line, there is no winning. We'll be left with nothing but the dust of our own progress, fighting with whatever sticks and stones we can find in the rubble. It's a sobering reality, isn't it? We've built this incredible high-tech world, but it's all sitting on a foundation of nuclear glass. The real question is, will we keep pushing our luck, or will we finally realize that we're the only ones who can stop the clock from hitting zero? We're living in a world built by geniuses, but held together by thin, fragile threads of diplomacy. We've come a long way from the Stone Age, but it's terrifyingly easy to see how quickly we could be sent back to it. History is a cycle, and we're currently standing right on the edge of the next spin. Whether this ends in a new era of enlightenment or a long, cold silence is entirely up to the people who hold the keys today. Thanks for diving into this with me. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.